Good morning for another edition of Notes from the Digital Underground. It's October 12th, 2022, early in the morning, still a little dark out as the seasons change. And as usual, I'm a little quiet because I got some people sleeping upstairs. I think I have about 30 minutes, so I'm going to see how much I can get through here. So a couple areas I just want to hit in terms of brief updates, and then I want to get to some content that I'm working on with collaborating with someone on to try and I guess you could say kind of package up some of this material in such a way that it's a little bit more compelling, easier to approach, and help people understand that there are some different ways to look at things out there and different paradigms and some of which may be helpful and constructive, especially if you're having a hard time with the way kind of the world is structured and finding yourself and what the hell are we doing here, that sort of thing. So we'll hit one thing at a time. So I've got two older kids that are in college right now. And I just spent the weekend with one of them in Denver, which was really great. Primarily because what you find as a parent is that it's not all the time that your kids actually want to spend time with you. So in this particular case is sort of freshmen or sophomores at school where they have some time and they're sort of settling in. And anyway, we had a really nice time. Spent some time in the mountains. I took some pretty short hikes. Red Rocks was one of them, and Lookout Mountain was another one. And you definitely get this sense as I sort of explore geometry and metaphysics and sort of how the sort of structure of existence or being or reality, as I sort of look at that, this idea of being a parent and genetics and childbirth and sort of this sort of outgrowth from the sperm and the egg, and you get this sort of genetic fractal of you that sort of exists, which is implanted very much, what you sort of implant in the world that has sort of a framework which you help establish, right, one way or the other. Anyway, it's fascinating to have relationships with your kids and sort of see how it is that they see the world, and particularly when you have sort of a male-male dynamic versus male-female. I have both a son and a daughter who are older. It's fascinating to see and sort of contextualize within sort of this metaphysical inquiry, if we can call it that. And so I wanted to speak and sort of take note of that as it relates to the sort of the project proper, metaphysical inquiry. As I think I said in one of my last posts, I've started a PhD program, computer science, at Florida Atlantic. And really interesting. I'm only in my second class, but I'm sort of doing a deep dive on artificial intelligence, really machine learning, and both my first and second class have kind of been deep dives. And I'm only taking one class at a time because I'm obviously working at the same time. And so that's my primary focus and responsibility, but it does allow and permit me to do sort of a deep dive that most of the other students I don't think really have, because they're taking a lot of different classes. They don't really have the ability to do that. And so it's been really interesting to just really get inside the engine that drives most of the artificial intelligence software in the world. There's all sorts of different models, and there's a massive amount of investment going on right now in AI across all sorts of domains. But there's some basic building blocks from which most of those models are structured, either layered on top of each other or primarily structured. There is a geometric foundation to some of that stuff, an algebraic and a geometric formulation in terms of computers essentially deal with numbers, right? So in order to deal with massive amounts of data and process it, you really need to lay it out in these matrices, which are called tensors in sort of the Python land. And from that, you basically, particularly as it relates to predictive problems, you sort of lay things out and encode them and then perform operations of them and then sort of look for optimal outcomes as measured based upon, variance, more or less. So it's a gross oversimplification of how that stuff works, but I'm in the middle of building a lot of that stuff right now. And then I have a paper that I'm starting to think about, which I have a piece of it, which will be due at the end of the class. I'm going to try and see if I can publish something before the end of the year that speaks specifically to how it is that we elicit or understand the idea of meaning as it relates to language, which is really a big idea. It sort of spills into the cognitive science and the psychology and some other domains, which computer scientists usually do not make forays into, but is of interest to me. And ultimately, you sort of rest in the translation of text into these sort of these massive vectors of numeric values that get, again, churned up and something predictive comes out. I mean, if you look at sort of the Google chatbot situation, it's really primarily what's happening. You just sort of feed information and it learns, right, based upon interactions, request response, what a sort of a valid or an optimal response is to a current. And based on that, there's sort of some algorithms that it churns something out on the other side, and then it sort of looks real, right? So in some sense, first of all, is it sentient? Is it conscious? I think most computer scientists would tell you certainly not, because they know kind of how it works. But it certainly appears to be, right? And so you get into, and I don't know how much of this I'm going to be able to touch on in this paper, but you sort of get into this whole idea of, where the boundaries of computing as it relates to intelligence and as it relates to thinking and as it relates to the application of, understanding the human experience, both, psychologically and sort of materialistically, us being embodied in these physical forms, right? And I think that where I've landed on this is there's a basic bifurcation in terms of, there's an analytic side to us, which is very much aligned with computing and this sort of acquisition of knowledge. And I wrote about that in my last paper in terms of creating a framework of knowledge acquisition that's based on quantum measurement theory. That was the topic of my last paper called IRA. And then you have sort of an emotive structure within us. So it's sort of a heart-mind type split. And while the mind certainly behaves sort of like a computer in many respects, and is sort of frameworked by this idea of language, right, and meaning and symbol, right, the heart sort of behaves and has a different set of principles that are not so easy to model. But so there's an underlying mathematical structure, certainly to the analytic side of our existence, from which society emerges, from which language emerges, from which our understanding emerges, and all of this. And I'm looking forward to getting into that a little bit, presuming that I can. Some challenges with the qualifying exam with the committee that I have to deal with now starting next year, but I think I should be able to do that. It's just going to take a long time. So to make that worthwhile, I have to sort of publish some pieces along the way. Otherwise, I'm going to feel like it's a bit of a waste. And of course, I'll come on here and spit whatever this is every couple of months. And keep the diary entries up. The site, by the way, was relaunched. Notes to the Digital Underground. It's no longer Snowcone Diaries. So some of the search capabilities and indexing are sort of reformulating. And so it's interesting to see what the traffic patterns look like on the site now, but it's primarily there for, a library of research around ancient studies and philosophy and sacred geometry and mysticism. And much of that is still there and available. Notes from digitalunderground.net. I also have a couple of books that I just published. You can find them on there too. Homo Mysticus, which is, let's see, behind me. I have a whole box of these right behind me. A nice cover designed by Chris Geiger, actually, and this symbol that I'll get into a little bit, perhaps. And then Metaphysics Reconsidered, which is a book on sort of a Gnostic rendering of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. And so I've been somewhat obsessed by this idea of mathematics, and you can see actually if I tilt this picture back here at the top is actually a rendition of all the different fields and disciplines of mathematics. And you can see right under it is a little Buddha drawing that was written by a friend of mine. And then to the left of it is of course, a Sri Yantra, which is a sort of geometric figure in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, which is a representation of the cosmos, right? And then a master's degree, and then a little picture that's drawn by my daughter, which I still carry around. But the point being that this idea of, mathematics as a sort of descriptive language, right, and language more generally, right, is extremely powerful, but has limits that typically I don't think are really very well understood or very well articulated. Even I find some people in the academic community. So ultimately, we deal with language, we deal with symbols, we deal with meaning, and we tend to equate truth or power, right, weight, to the predictive power of language. And so therefore mathematics, because of its predictive power in all sorts of different domains, certainly ML, machine learning being one of them, we've identified as, hey, this is the language of the hand of God, right? Certainly physics, quantum mechanics, they all sort of are founded upon mathematical formulations which take measurement phenomena and allow you to predict outcomes. This is Bob deciding he's going to sit on my research papers. And this, as it relates to natural language processing and machine learning in general, is of course an area of interest and very much aligned with certainly some of the work that I've done as it relates to sacred geometry, numerology, and how these concepts, which we find in nature, right, and we are now finding are applicable to other domains as well, whether it's physics or computer science, how it is that these domains shed light on the basic structure of reality, right, from a metaphysical inquiry standpoint. And to that end, that's a good segue to go into some of these discussion points that I'm working on with Shasta to try and produce some content as it relates to what it is that we're talking about. And she's very talented on the production side, very good with sound and symbol and video production. And so we're going to read some of this text and see where it goes. And I'm going to switch the view here so you can actually see the text as I come up, and then also some of the symbols that I have on my desktop. This is a symbol that hopefully you can see that is sort of foundational to Homo Mysticus, and also Ira, just in terms of unity in duality. And if you look at all these different polarities, there is sort of a truth, an underlying truth that sort of sits in the middle. And this is a geometric representation of that idea. This is one of the reasons why sacred geometry is so powerful, because the meaning itself is encoded in the picture. And this gets into symbol and language and meaning sort of more generally. What is it there for? What is its use? And we try and convey things to other people, whether it's mundane, hey, I want to get a sandwich, or whether it's, more metaphysical about the nature of reality and our relationship to both ourselves, other people, and, global consciousness, right? Whatever it is we want to call that. And this diagram in particular gives you an opportunity to look at the basic dualistic kind of frameworks that rest in sort of at the center of our intellectual understanding of what it is of this world, right? Wave particle duality, right? That's physicists are confused. Well, how is it, can something be a wave or a particle? Well, it's really something else, right? So the mind and matter, right? How is it that this is Ira, my last paper was okay. So how do we reconcile the sort of the relationship between mind and matter? Again, there's something else, right? From which the two emerge. Yin and yang, right? Sort of you have the feminine and masculine components, right? The black and the white that sort of merge and coalesce to form something different, right? Subject object, the same sort of idea, right? So in a sense, there's this idea of cones, right? What's the sound of one hand clapping, right? And this sort of duality, which is fundamental to this physical existence, right? In order for me to, and this is cliche, right? And you hear this in the sort of mystic literature all the time. I think John is up. This idea that you can only know light through the dark, and you can only know someone else in relation to yourself, right? That's the fundamental truth, right? And with that, I will need to close and come back to this hopefully a little bit later, and I can get into some of this text. But namaste, peace. I'll catch up with you shortly after we get this little guy to school. Cheers.